There was a lot of debating around Overwatch, specifically talking about 5v5 or whether or not Overwatch 2 is going in the right direction with the HP changes and a lot of the other various balance changes that are happening. But I think something that's slipping under the radar is the hero design in Overwatch 2, specifically talking about the new characters that have come recently. Mauga, Illari, Lifeweaver, the reworks that have happened. There's a lot of these characters that I think are fundamentally missing the mark, and I think it has really negative ramifications for the future of Overwatch. But if you don't subscribe, I'm gonna call up Blizzard and tell them to reinstate Hanzo's one-shot on every character. So yeah, if you don't want that, yeah, subscribe right now. Now, everyone can say what they want about Overwatch, but it's undoubtedly had some of the best and most impactful character design, period. Like, take a character like Genji, who was iconic in a trailer. You got to know his personality and know him as a character, and then when you go in and play him, he fulfilled the hero fantasy that you would see in the cinematics. And I think especially in Overwatch 1, across the board, they really nailed the idea of a character feeling really interactive, fun, and engaging to play. Now, there wasn't always hits, okay? There was some characters that didn't quite make it into, like, what I would call a good hero design. But for the most part, the design was phenomenal. The character kits, the character abilities, phenomenal. But when we go into Overwatch 2, there has been a huge series of misses as far as the creation of these characters, the design of these characters. And I think this is actually a more important problem than the other problems around balance and even 5v5, 6v6. I think most of the problems in Overwatch, most of the complaints in Overwatch ultimately don't matter to the overall scope of the game more than characters feeling fun, interactive, and fulfilling a sort of hero fantasy within that character. But taking it from the present and going backwards, we do got to talk about Mauga. And I think Mauga is a perfect example of a character that is just flawed from the get-go as far as his design. He's a character that his entire concept is to stand there unfazed and just trade bullets with the enemy tank. He really wants to shoot at the enemy tank the most. He's going to get a large amount of HP from them. He dominates every tank matchup. And in a nutshell, he has pretty boring, uninteractive gameplay. Now, there's some slight decision making with your rush, like where do I push, how do I push, things like that, but that's not any different than like every character in the game. But like the core mechanics of the hero and the gameplay loop of the hero is pretty uninspired. And I realize everyone's gonna have different opinions about this, but I think the easiest question you can ask yourself about a character's hero design is, if this character was meta, would you enjoy Overwatch, yes or no? Like, is it good or bad if this character's meta? We had Amalgam meta, and almost universally people hated it. I think a very small percentage of people might have liked it, but they were dropped as a child. Okay, I'm just joking. But when you think about a character and you think, if this character was the best character in their slot, in the meta, in the game, would it create a better, more interactive, more fun Overwatch? And with Mauga, the answer was undoubtedly no. I mean, a lot of the counters people were playing to Mauga, whether it was Pharah Mercy, back when Pharah Mercy just played Skybox, whether it was Bastion, Reaper, whether it was just trade resources with the Mauga in the mirror, no matter what it was not fun, interactive, inspired gameplay. And I think Mauga was a fundamental mistake in design. I don't think that he should have ever been created or implemented into Overwatch. And if he is here, then you never want him to be in a situation where he's meta, right? Which we're kind of seeing a little bit now. In the mid-season patch of Season 9, he got buffs, and now he's seeing a lot more scrim play and meta play, which, if there's a character that you never want meta, then you just got to keep them weak forever, and then why even ever have them? Like, don't introduce a character that you aren't comfortable with them being meta in some regard. And if they are comfortable with Mauga being meta, I don't really know what to say to that, because I think that it creates a terrible meta. And while you can let me know if you agree or disagree with that down below, the next character we got to talk about is Illari. And Illari is a character that I don't necessarily think has the same problems as Mauga, but it does feel like a character that is a bit short-sighted, especially when we think about the new state of Overwatch post HP change and DPS passive, right? Illari was always the support that could play almost a third DPS, could almost fill that slot, and now we're in a situation where damage is really important in the support role, utility is really important in the support role, and when you have a support that doesn't have utility, but they do have damage and heals, primarily damage, but then their damage is just fundamentally weaker in the head-to-head because they don't have the passive, Alari feels like she was left behind. It's almost like a character that I think in this new version of Overwatch as of Season 9, she just wouldn't have been created, at least not in this way. And maybe we could get reworks to move her towards that direction. I think right now she's just in this really awkward state where she doesn't really have a great identity. She doesn't do anything really unique compared to a lot of the other supports that they can't do. I mean, there's a lot of argument to say that characters like BAP are better damage dealers than characters like Alari with far more utility. And this character is also a character that I think would probably not be that healthy as a meta character either. I mean, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but it would feel very odd to have a support that is primarily just a damage dealer that is a poker, no mobility, not diving with the strategy, sitting in the back and dealing and trading damage as one of your best characters in the game in a meta. I don't exactly think that would create the healthiest meta, but I want to pass the question off to you. What do you think are the fundamental problems with Alari? What do you think about her design? And do you think it's a problem with her design, or do you think it's a problem with her numbers and her power level? Let me know down below. But the character that definitely failed in hero design, in my personal opinion, and that's Lifeweaver. And I do know that there are some people that really love Lifeweaver's design and play style, and I don't expect everyone to agree with me here, but I believe that a heal bot support, I think, just removes one axis of interaction that you don't need to remove. Like, there's no reason that a hero just doesn't do, like, meaningful damage. I mean, Lifeweaver's damage is basically not meaningful at all. It's just, like, spam damage. There's no reason a hero should do no meaningful damage or no meaningful heals, right? It should do both, right? In some capacity. I don't really think it makes sense to eliminate something that makes a hero interesting, unique, and allows you to make more plays, right? Sacrifice some of the crazy survivability on Lifeweaver, maybe a little bit. Give him more ways to interact with damage, and then the character could still have the pedal, the pull, all the things that make the character unique, but also can interact with damage in another way, giving a player more options. And I think that Lifeweaver could have been created in a way that gets to try out all these unique abilities that they wanted to try, but also doesn't remove a core thing that, like, I think pretty much every character should be able to do and it actually matter. Now, the one exception to this rule you're going to state is Mercy. Mercy is the one exception that we've seen before that doesn't really damage, right? She doesn't really damage, but she has utility that directly creates damage. So it's a little bit interesting because I think that's like the only way to make it so that a character doesn't have to do either healing or damage, right, in the support category, is if it's replaced by something else. Like, if Lifeweaver could perhaps not do that much damage, but his kit was centered around creating damaged opportunities or damaging opportunities, then I would be like, okay, that makes sense. Like, if his primary fire made it so that all of a sudden people that were shot or followed up by could be critted, or they were critted or something like that. If, like, he stuck enough pedals to them, they're critted. So it makes sense where, oh, he's not doing a lot of damage, but he enables that, right? And even if you don't agree with me and you think Lifeweaver's design is perfectly fine, you just think that it needs to be balanced further and some things need to be changed, it definitely doesn't make sense to have a character like this in this state as of Season 9. Because, like, right now, Lifeweaver is by far the worst hero in the game, and it's not particularly close. And it really comes down to the fact that the entire game is changing to the point where damage and utility is like the true things that matter. Like, healing is cool, but it's not going to get you as much consistent value as damage and utility. And Lifeweaver has utility, has good utility even, but no damage increase in the fight, no changing of breakpoints, no added to pressure, not really. And you could do things to change that. Like, one of the things I love is make Weaver's weapon like a needler from Halo, where if it sticks enough to somebody, it like explodes. I think that's really cool and rewards you for hitting multiple shots on the same target. And it would have like a slight like little track thing like the needler gun does, but you still have to aim it pretty well. But looking how they have changed Lifeweaver every single patch as he's kind of, you know, been through multiple patches with some small changes, they haven't really wanted to remove him from his initial almost Healbot-esque support identity. So perhaps Blizzard has an entirely different direction that they want to have with Weaver, but a character that can't interact with the fight with damage, giving the character less options, and a character that needs to be so strong with just their healing and their utility that they can make a difference, like a meaningful difference. I think it goes crazy far against the grain of what is most people's ideal meta in Overwatch, ideal gameplay loop in Overwatch. So I do want to pass the question off to you. I personally think that Lifeweaver was a huge miss in design. Not that it can't be salvageable, but I think a rather large rework would be needed to put Lifeweaver in a place where we get all this unique utility, but the character is more interactive, has more options, more fun to play against, and just creates a healthier game environment overall. Now, another one that I do want to talk about is actually the Hog rework, because I think that the Hog rework was the biggest missed opportunity that we've basically seen. And I think the Sombra rework was actually really good. I think the Pharah rework was amazing, 10 out of 10. I think that it was just such a great change. But this Hog rework, I think, is absolutely terrible. And there's a couple of reasons why. It doesn't change Hog fundamentally, which I think is needed. Like, I understand you want to make his identity around a hook, but I would say moving from 6v6 to 5v5, Hog is the character that is the most out of place out of every character, because he could never be a main tank. He could never fulfill that role even slightly. He can't frontline unless you give him infinite sustain, and if you give him infinite sustain, he doesn't die. They wanted to get rid of Hog's one-shot, so they increased the amount of hooks you could throw out, and they added a new ability that also knocks people up and CCs people, crowd controls people. So by trying to fix one problem with the insta-kill problem, which I do think was a problem on a tank, you created more crowd control problems, mass amounts of crowd control problems, where people are getting hooked all the time and stunned and slowed and all these things that when we moved over to Overwatch 2 in the first place, we literally wanted to move against. We didn't want to have as much CC. We wanted to have far less CC. And yes, we have less CC technically, but with one less tank, there's like a giant sponge less to absorb all the CC. So it actually feels like more in a lot of ways. And I don't envy the developers, because Hog's identity in large part was connected to many of the problems that Hog had. It's a character that never would have been created in a 5v5 system. And I'm not here to debate 5v5 versus 6v6. If you want some of that, go check out my boy Samito. But in specifically talking about the Hog rework, I think that they needed to probably just let parts of his identity go. And I know that that's really tricky, right? Because especially when there's a character that is loved, you don't want to change their core identity. And the reason you don't is because there's so many sub niches in Overwatch of groups of players that really love their hero, right? Groups of players that really, really love Junkrat, and they'll play Junkrat and only Junkrat. Groups of players that really, really love Genji, and they will only play Genji. Doesn't matter what you will do to that character, doesn't matter how good he is in the meta, they will only play Genji. There's a giant groups of people that really, really love Doom. Oh yeah, they did change Doom. But when you see the Doom community, players like get quaked on, constantly complaining, this is the result of what happens when you take their fundamental character, their fundamental gameplay loop, the character that they identified with and loved, and you change it to something that doesn't reflect those things at all. And if you take Hog, remove his hook, or change it into something completely different, remove the character, completely change him, move him to the DPS role, do whatever, there's going to be a group of people that are frustrated that you messed up their character, right? And that is like being between a rock and a hard place. There is no perfect solution here. And it's one of the reasons why like reworks can be as dangerous as they are impactful, right? They are not always perfect, and it's not always possible to make them perfect. But that's another reason why when we add new characters to the game under the new system, they really need to hit the mark. They really do, because if, let's say, you fundamentally change Lifeweaver, there'll be people complaining, oh, where's my hero? You fundamentally change Malga. People will complain about those things, but there, one, hasn't been a ton of time to build those communities, right? There's not like a giant sub-community to these characters as much as characters in the past, which is a good thing, because those characters had longer to like accumulate people. And two, we can try to implement new heroes that just won't need reworks. I know that that's kind of simple to say, but as much as I like a lot of the new changes that they're doing as of Season 9, and I like the direction that the game is going in, eventually you need to stop fundamentally changing the game and then address things like individually, because otherwise characters are gonna always be on this axis where they no longer fit the new state of the game, and there's problems with identity that you run into that can't really easily be solved. So yeah. Now, the other characters, I don't really think there's anything super fundamentally wrong about them. I think Junker Queen is great. I think Sojourn, while she has been overtuned, there's nothing really that wrong with her kit, but there's also nothing really that unique with her kit. She's like a Ash Hanzo character-esque with slight changes to some of the pieces of utility, and then, you know, the power level ramped up really, really high. I don't think that's necessarily a character design flaw, because they pretty much played it safe with Sojourn, but it was a power creep problem, which is a completely different video that's not this one. And then last up is Kiriko, which, of course, Kiriko is going to be very, very controversial. I will go out on a limb and say that Kiriko, her kit and her kit idea, there's nothing wrong with it. I think that the idea behind her abilities are fine and good, and I think it's just the execution and the power level of some of these things. I probably think that her teleporter should probably have a wind-up. That's like probably the only problem that I have with the character fundamentally, and you could compensate her by giving more power to some other part of her kit, but, you know, making it so if you want to teleport, it doesn't even have to be a full second. It could be a little bit less than that, but there is some amount of planning. You can't be in and actively on the fight. You need like to do like a weird like animation in order to teleport first, and there's a little delay. But regardless of her, I'm not here to debate her because I don't think she fits the fundamental problems that Lifeweaver, Alari, Mauga, and the Hog rework all have in common. Now, that being said, Venture is just around the corner, and we're going to be able to play test them pretty soon, and that character looks really interesting with a cool gameplay loop and very inspired. So yeah, maybe the streak will end and the new hero will break the three-peat of characters that I feel like have failed to live up to the hero fantasy and have been hero designs that I think are a net negative for Overwatch 2 as far as meta is concerned. But I do want to pass the question off to you. Do you agree or disagree with any of my assessments? Let me know which ones you would disagree with in the comments down below and why. And I'm really curious about how people feel about a lot of the new heroes in Overwatch 2. Anyways, thank you so much for coming by. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.